Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep beneath the sand, past locked doors and faded curses, into a place few have ever walked. Picture yourself descending stone steps older than your entire civilization, your flashlight cutting shaky lines across walls painted with prayers for the dead. The air is heavy still, as if the tomb itself is holding its breath. And there, in the half-dark, a golden face waits, eyes closed forever, mouth set in eternal silence. This isn't just about treasure. It's about something far more human and far more disturbing. Because behind this mask isn't just a boy king or a goddess queen. Behind it is the secret no civilization ever wanted to admit: that you can't marry your sister forever and expect your children to thank you for it. You probably won't survive this story with your romantic view of ancient Egypt intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move closer, brushing ancient dust from gold worked so fine it almost seems soft. That famous mask, that serene face, is more mask than truth. Beneath it, the bones tell a story no Pharaoh's priest dared speak aloud. You're standing over the body of a boy so warped by his ancestors' obsession with blood purity that walking, breathing, even living were acts of defiance. Imagine being 9 years old and needing a walking stick to cross your palace floor. Imagine knowing you're a god because everyone tells you so, but also knowing your body betrays you with every step. Egypt's tombs hold more than treasure. They hold proof that divine blood is sometimes just poison in disguise. You're not here just for Tutankhamun. You're here for the whole, long, slow-motion tragedy that made him possible. The priests who whispered, "Keep the blood pure." The kings who nodded, believing themselves above nature. The queens who gave birth over and over to babies who wouldn't survive the year. You've arrived at the end of their story, but to understand it, you'll have to walk it backward, step by painful step. The heat presses close, the silence thicker than the stone. You feel the centuries close around you like arms, not welcoming, but warning. Because this isn't fiction. This is history, and it's written in bone and blood. It starts with an idea. A simple one, really. If you believe your blood comes from the gods, why would you mix it with anything less? It's not arrogance, at least not at first. It's faith, twisted neatly into politics, wrapped in gold, and buried with prayers. The first pharaoh to marry his sister probably thought he was saving Egypt from impurity, not starting a chain reaction of deformity and death that would echo for 3,000 years. They didn't understand genetics. They didn't even have a word for it. But even now, you can feel the consequences pressed into these walls. The child buried here isn't alone. He's part of a chain of children, some born twisted, some born silent. Each one a step deeper into a labyrinth with no exit. You move deeper, past murals where gods embrace kings, where eternal life is promised to those who keep their bloodlines clean. Except eternity doesn't look like this. Eternity doesn't limp. Eternity doesn't hide walking sticks in its golden tomb. Yet, here they are, more than 100, buried with this boy king like silent confessions. He couldn't walk unaided, and still, the priests said he was a god. The artists painted him tall and strong. The rituals spoke of perfection while servants propped up his failing frame. You're not just here to visit the dead. You're here to meet the lie Egypt told itself, until it couldn't anymore. You step closer to a wall painted with images of offerings, baskets of bread, jars of beer, fat geese waiting to be roasted. All the things a healthy boy might have enjoyed. But the bones say otherwise. The bones tell you about a twisted foot, a curved spine, a malformed chest, about breathless days beneath the desert sun, about doctors hovering helplessly, about a body fighting battles it could never win. And somewhere in this silence, a whisper seems to stir, not from the walls, not from the past, but from the logic itself. What did you think would happen? You imagine standing in a palace where every portrait shows ancestors with the same strange jaws, the same sloping skulls, the same hollowed eyes. You imagine hearing the same reassurances. This is divine. This is holy. This is how gods look. But gods shouldn't die so young. Gods shouldn't need canes to stand before their people. Gods shouldn't be buried with their stillborn daughters. Still, Egypt believed. Or perhaps Egypt feared too much to stop believing. Your flashlight catches on a glint of gold again. A staff, inlaid with lapis, beautiful, useless. A crutch, disguised as a symbol of power. It feels like a joke now, but you doubt anyone was laughing when they placed it here. They were just doing what had always been done, dressing up tragedy and splendor and calling it divine. Outside, the sand shifts over tombs not yet opened. Inside, you wonder how many more of these silent confessions wait, wrapped in linen and guarded by statues who never blink. This is where your journey starts. Not in glory, not in conquest, but in a small, broken body, laid carefully beneath a mask of perfection. You're going to walk backward now, through dynasties and deserts, through incest and isolation, through prayers and plagues. You're going to meet the kings and queens who thought they could cheat nature. You're going to see how believing yourself a god doesn't make you immune to biology. And when we're done, you'll understand why this tomb isn't just a grave. It's a warning, written not in words, but in flesh and bone. You keep moving through the narrow halls of the tomb, feeling the stone grow warmer beneath your fingers. Not in temperature. This place has been cold for thousands of years, but in weight. History settles heavy on your shoulders the deeper you go. Behind each painted figure of a god lies another dead child. Behind each gilded artifact, another body undone by bloodlines too tangled to bear. The ancient Egyptians didn't invent inbreeding, but they perfected the art of giving it a divine excuse. You imagine the first royal sibling pair sitting beneath the stars, watching the Nile glisten darkly under the moon. They weren't fools. They knew their people whispered. But they also knew something more dangerous. Those whispers would stop the moment priests called their union holy. Imagine being told from birth that you were made of different stuff, divine breath in your lungs, sacred ichor in your veins. Imagine growing up knowing ordinary people were beneath you, unclean in ways you couldn't articulate but could never forget. Imagine your advisors reminding you, over and over, gods marry gods. You marry your sister because your father married his. That's how dynasties last forever. But you're standing here, aren't you? And they're not. The first generation might have seemed fine. Maybe a slightly pointed chin, a longer face. Nothing anyone would call alarming. Historians still argue whether those earliest royal marriages were matters of love, duty, or sheer political strategy. Either way, the door was opened, and through it crawled centuries of suffering, disguised as splendor. You press on, passing murals where kings present offerings to gods who, suspiciously, look an awful lot like the kings themselves. That's no coincidence. Egypt's rulers didn't just borrow the power of divinity, they inherited it through ceremony and blood. And if you truly believe your blood is sacred, why risk mixing it with something less? You can almost hear the court priests justifying it. The commoner's blood carries impurity. Ours carries the sun's light. In truth, theirs carried something else entirely. The first hints of deformity, recessive genes curling like snakes beneath royal skin. A generation passes. A child is born with a jaw that doesn't quite fit right. The doctors say nothing aloud. The priests declare it a sign of divine uniqueness. "Look how the gods mark their chosen," they cry. No one dares contradict them. Another generation. A prince needs a cane by 16. His hips are too wide for a warrior's armor. His chest never quite fills with breath the way it should. He dies young. The priests call it the will of the gods. The doctors quietly add another strange body to their growing list of royal afflictions. Meanwhile, the peasants outside the palace walls keep marrying who they please. Their children grow strong in the fields. Their sons live to see old age. Their daughters bear healthy babies without fanfare. But inside the gilded rooms, the blood grows thinner, heavier, more poisoned with each generation. And still the cycle spins. Gods marry gods. Brothers marry sisters. Children are born and die, and no one stops to wonder why. Or rather, some do. But they stop wondering aloud. Because speaking against the divine bloodline is treason. Better to look away. Better to tell yourself it's just fate or a curse or the gods' unknowable plan. You imagine a princess on her wedding night staring at a boy who shares her face, her blood, her family's secrets. Neither of them speaks of fear. Neither of them dares ask, "What if we're wrong?" Their silence carves another notch in the lineage. Another layer of sediment builds atop the foundation. More fragile bones. More bodies that can't carry the weight of a crown or a child. The priests chant louder. The artists paint grander. The architecture grows more elaborate. Distraction becomes a national project. Don't look too closely at the king's strange features. Don't ask why his children die so young. Focus instead on the pyramids, the temples, the ceremonies that promise eternity. But eternity, it turns out, doesn't favor the inbred. Historians still argue whether Egypt's obsession with blood purity was born of fear or arrogance. Did they dread dilution more than decay? Or did they truly believe their divine lineage could overcome the laws of nature through sheer willpower? Either way, they were wrong. You pause before another wall painting. A pharaoh holds a crook and flail, symbols of power that look suspiciously like the canes buried with his descendants. He stands tall in the art. In life, he likely struggled to stand at all. You wonder how many palace doctors recognized the pattern. How many nurses watched royal children fail to thrive and whispered warnings to one another in dark corridors. How many advisors knew but cared more for their positions than for the lives being gambled with each royal birth. You press on, deeper into darkness, deeper into truth. The deeper you go, the harder it is to believe anyone truly thought this could end differently. The signs were everywhere, painted on walls, wrapped in linen, etched in bone. But power has a way of silencing inconvenient truths, especially when those truths come wrapped in soft flesh and royal titles. You're starting to understand why this tomb feels heavier than others. It isn't just the weight of gold. It's the weight of mistakes, repeated so often they became tradition. The weight of children sacrificed on the altar of a bloodline. The weight of gods who never existed, but who demanded obedience all the same. And somewhere, beneath all this stone, beneath all this history, a boy king lies still, his body twisted by choices he never made. His tomb gleams with gold, but it cannot hide the truth etched into his bones. This isn't just Egypt's story, it's humanity's. The moment we believe our blood makes us better, we've already begun to rot from within. You keep walking through the hush of stone corridors, past walls lined with gods offering eternal life in exchange for loyalty. Loyalty to what, exactly? Not to kindness, not to love, to blood, to the idea that your veins, your lineage, your family tree mattered more than health, more than happiness, more than humanity itself. You step into another chamber. The air is stale, close, and heavy with something worse than time. Secrets. Secrets wrapped in linen and incense, painted over in scenes of divine perfection. But you know better now. You know those serene faces hide bones warped by centuries of arrogance disguised as devotion. Picture yourself born into this world. Born a prince, a princess, with servants to dress you, priests to bless you, and courtiers to bow whenever you pass. Except, your body doesn't work the way theirs does. Your hip twists, your foot drags, your jaw won't close quite right, and every breath feels like a battle against something unseen but ancient. You watch other children, commoners, run, climb, grow strong under the Egyptian sun, and you wonder why you cannot. But no one tells you. Not really. They just say you're different. Chosen. Marked by the gods. Your parents, your grandparents, everyone around you believes this is how things must be. Brother marries sister. Cousin weds cousin. Not for love, rarely even for choice, but for duty. To keep the bloodline pure. To keep the divine essence flowing, even as it grows thinner, weaker, poisoned by repetition. Imagine your wedding day. You don't stand before a stranger. You stand before your brother, your sister, someone you've known your whole life, someone whose face reflects your own deformities back at you. No priest hesitates. No servant flinches. This is tradition. This is sacred. This is the way things have always been. And deep down, beneath the layers of silk and ceremony, you wonder, why? But you don't ask aloud. Questions are dangerous. Questions unravel dynasties. So you smile. You bow. You obey. Historians still argue whether these royal siblings felt love or revulsion for one another, whether they accepted their fates with resignation or rebellion, locked silent behind their eyes. The records don't tell us. They speak only of unions celebrated, offspring born or buried. Step by step, generation by generation, the damage deepens. A limp becomes a clubfoot. A narrow jaw becomes a skull too misshapen for breath to pass easily. A tendency toward weakness becomes a certainty of it. Each child born of this sacred union carries a heavier burden of genetic mistakes, wrapped up in gold and incense and denial. Outside the palace, life continues in rougher but healthier ways. Farmers till the fields. Craftsmen shape stone. Their children run and laugh and grow without ceremony. Their bloodlines mix freely, survive naturally, but they are not gods. They do not matter to history the way you do, or so you're told. Inside the palace, inside these tombs, inside this story, you watch the royals wither behind walls of privilege and superstition. You watch them prop one another up, marry one another off, bury one another too soon. You hear the whispers behind silk curtains. The child is sickly. The prince does not walk well. The princess cannot bear children. And still, the cycle spins on, brother to sister, nephew to aunt, cousin to cousin, over and over, as if sheer stubbornness could defeat nature itself. You picture a boy sitting alone in a golden room, his toys untouched because his hands cramp too easily, his legs ache too much. You picture a girl hiding from the sun because her skin burns too fast. Her eyes cannot bear the light. These are not gods. These are not monsters. These are children caught in a net. They did not weave, but cannot escape. Their ancestors meant well, perhaps. They wanted to protect what they thought was sacred. They wanted to preserve power, to keep divinity bottled up in blood, like wine in a jar. But wine turns, blood spoils, and bodies break beneath the weight of so many mistakes. Still, the priests nod, the advisors bow, the artists paint portraits of strength over bones too brittle to lift a sword. The people cheer for gods they will never see bleed, never see falter, because those truths are hidden behind palace doors and buried beneath sands where no one was meant to dig. Except you are digging now, aren't you? Step by step, breath by breath, peeling back layers of stone and story and silence. And what you find is not divine. It is achingly, horrifyingly human. You pause before another painting. A royal couple stands tall, serene, surrounded by lotus blossoms and sacred symbols. Husband and wife, brother and sister. Their smiles do not reach their eyes. Their hands rest lightly on the shoulders of children who will not live to see adulthood. You wonder if they knew. You wonder if, in the dark hours when no priests watched and no servants listened, they wept for what their blood had doomed them to repeat. But tradition is a heavy thing, and fear of change heavier still. Better to trust the gods, they thought. Better to follow the path laid by ancestors who surely knew better, even as that path led only to smaller, sicker generations. Even as bones bent and spines twisted and lungs failed. Outside, the Nile flows on, indifferent. Crops grow, stars wheel overhead. Life, real life, continues without the need for golden masks or incestuous marriages. But inside these walls, inside these families, the spiral tightens, the foundation weakens, the cracks widen. And through it all, they still believe themselves gods. You keep moving forward, though the air feels thicker now, as if the walls themselves are pressing inward, trying to make you understand. The deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. This isn't just about royal marriages. This is about generations layering mistake upon mistake, all wrapped in gold leaf and good intentions. You trace your fingers along a painted column where lotus blossoms wind skyward, delicate and perfect in their symmetry. But you know now that real life inside these palaces was far from perfect. Symmetry gave way to deformity, strength to weakness, all under the silent watch of gods who never intervened. Picture a child born in one of these rooms. The first breath is shallow, the cry thin. The midwives share glances they don't voice aloud. The priests step in quickly, pronouncing the infant blessed, marked by divinity. The deformities aren't defects, they're proof. Proof that the gods favor this family so much they've bent the child's very bones to show it. Historians still argue whether anyone truly believed this. Did the priests convince themselves of their own lies? Or did they simply recognize that maintaining power was easier when everyone agreed to look away from the truth? You can almost hear the conversations echoing through marble halls. Another child born weak? The gods work in mysterious ways. A princess unable to bear heirs? She must be destined for the afterlife's glory instead. A prince who limps? Surely a sign of spiritual depth, not physical failure. With every generation, the signs became harder to ignore. Yet each time, they found ways to reinterpret suffering as sanctity. A clubfoot was divine uniqueness. A misshapen skull was a royal hallmark. Early deaths? Proof that these children were too pure for the mortal world. The sediment of suffering built slowly, layer upon layer. Like silt from the Nile, it settled quietly at first, barely noticed, easily brushed aside. But over time, it hardened into something no one could deny. A dynasty weighed down not by enemies or famine, but by its own blood. You imagine the palace physicians keeping their records in secret. Lists of symptoms they couldn't explain. Treatments that never worked. Bones that fractured too easily. Joints that swelled without cause. Fevers that burned hot and sudden, taking lives too young. The evidence stacked up like bricks in a tomb. But no one spoke of cause and effect. Not aloud, not where priests could hear. You step over a threshold worn smooth by time. Beyond it, a chamber painted with scenes of plenty, harvests, celebrations, children playing under the protective gaze of falcon-headed gods. A fantasy, you realize. A world that existed more in murals than in reality. Because behind these walls, children didn't play much. They rested on cushions, wrapped in linen against the sun, watched over by nurses who knew better than to hope too much. Every cough could be a portent, every stumble a sign that another godchild would not reach adulthood. And still, the marriages continued. Brother to sister, uncle to niece, cousin to cousin, over and over, each union adding another drop of poison to the well. You wonder how many of them dreaded their wedding nights, knowing the cost would be paid by the next generation. Did they look at their infants and pray the gods had spared them? Or had hope long since dried up, leaving only duty in its place? You press on, passing statues whose faces mirror the deformities hidden beneath royal veils. Elongated skulls, narrowed jaws, wide hips on bodies dressed as warriors. These weren't artistic choices. They were portraits of reality, softened only by stone and distance. Outside these palaces, peasants lived and died without ever knowing their rulers' secrets. They buried their dead in modest graves and moved on. They mixed bloodlines freely, raising children who carried the strength of diversity in their bones. But inside these walls, purity was worshipped over survival. Tradition trumped nature, and children suffered for it. You imagine a queen holding yet another stillborn child, her tears hidden behind curtains while priests mutter about divine mysteries. You imagine a prince too sickly to ride a chariot, carried instead to ceremonies where he's proclaimed mighty by trembling servants. The lies grew louder as the bodies grew weaker. Grand tombs, lavish offerings, paintings of eternal life, while real life drained away too soon. The foundation of Egypt's greatness wasn't just sand and stone. It was denial, piled high and deep until no one could see past it. Yet here you are, peeling back the layers. You've seen the bones. You've heard the whispers. You know now that what they called divine was often just decay hidden under gold. Historians still debate how conscious this destruction was. Did any ruler ever look in the mirror, trace the curve of a misshapen skull, and understand the price of their ancestors' choices? Or did they all go to their deaths believing themselves chosen, special, beyond the reach of mortal consequence? You think of the servants, those who cleaned the bandages, who prepared the medicines, who watched child after child falter. They must have known. They must have wondered how many more could survive under a curse mistaken for tradition. But servants don't write history. They bury it. You pause in front of a painted doorway, its scenes worn nearly smooth by time. A procession of gods leads a king to paradise. Another fantasy. Another promise broken by bones, too brittle to keep standing. You step through. The story deepens. The suffering thickens. The sediment builds higher. And ahead of you, more truths wait beneath layers of stone and silence. You step into a smaller chamber now, and the walls close tighter. The ceiling feels lower, the air more still, as though even the dust is holding its breath. On one wall, faint carvings show a child holding a lotus blossom, offering it to a god, a scene meant to convey innocence, devotion, purity. But you know better by now. You know what innocence costs in this place. This is where the bones begin to speak more clearly than the art. Beneath these painted scenes, beneath the golden masks and linen wrappings, lie skeletons that tell a different story. One of hips dislocated before birth, spines curled like snakes, skulls stretched and strained beyond nature's design. These aren't accidents. These are symptoms. Signs written in bone of a family tree tangled too tightly around itself. Imagine living here. Not as a ruler, but as a servant. A physician, perhaps. Your life bound to the palace, your duty to the royal children. Each new birth brings hope mingled with dread. Will this one survive longer than the last? Will this one walk without pain, breathe without struggle? You're told not to question. You're told the gods know best. But as you wash bandages and mix potions, you begin to see patterns even the priests pretend not to notice. You watch as tiny bodies fail to thrive, as once laughing children retreat into silent, sunless rooms. You hear the whispers. Another miscarriage, another stillbirth, another funeral cloaked in gold and incense. And through it all, the priests chant louder about divine favor, while the palace physicians write in quiet horror about club feet, cleft palates, misshapen bones. Historians still argue whether these physicians understood the true cause. Did they suspect but fear to speak? Or did they believe, as everyone around them believed, that this was simply the price of godhood? You move closer to the wall, tracing the faint outline of a name long since rubbed away. Names mattered here. Names tied you to gods, to ancestors, to the endless cycle of birth, marriage, death, and burial beneath painted ceilings. But names couldn't protect you from the blood flowing through your veins. Another child, another brother wed to another sister, another generation born already carrying the weight of past mistakes in their bones. The patterns accumulate like sediment in the Nile, layer upon layer, year after year. At first, it's small, an odd gait, a fragile constitution. Then it grows. Jaws that won't close, spines that won't straighten, hearts that won't beat strong enough to last. And still, the priests declare blessings. Still, the artists paint scenes of strength and eternity. Still, the people outside the palace walls bow their heads and believe, or pretend to. Outside, life continues in cycles of planting and harvest, of marriage and birth free from divine obsession. Inside, the cycles turn slower, crueler, more confined. Imagine standing at the bedside of a teenage prince, his body already failing him, his breath thin in the heat. You see the walking sticks stacked in the corner, golden, ornate, but still just sticks. You hear the prayers murmured outside the door. You wonder how long he has left, and how long before another boy, another sister, takes his place. You pause before another mural. This one shows a procession of servants bearing offerings, food, wine, jewels, to a seated king who looks impossibly young, impossibly serene. Another lie, painted in mineral pigment. You know the truth now. These kings rarely lived long enough to look old. Their serenity was forced, their smiles carved by artists paid to deny reality. In the darkness of this tomb, the bones tell no lies. They bear witness to the truth no priest dared speak. Purity kills. Not swiftly, not mercifully, but slowly, generation by generation. It creeps through families like a shadow, twisting bodies, stealing breath, snuffing out futures before they can begin. And yet, no one stopped. The cycle spun on. The priests nodded. The scribes recorded. The artists painted. The people prayed. And behind closed doors, queens wept over cradles too small to hold hope. You wonder how they justified it to themselves. Perhaps they thought the gods demanded sacrifice. Perhaps they believed suffering purified the soul. Perhaps they feared change more than death. After all, tradition offers comfort even as it devours you from within. You move deeper, past alcoves where small statues huddle. Household gods meant to protect against illness and harm. They failed, didn't they? Or perhaps they were never meant to succeed. Perhaps their role was only to watch, silent and powerless, as the people who worshipped them unraveled beneath the weight of their own pride. Historians still debate how aware the rulers were of the price they paid. Some records suggest attempts to marry outside the family, to bring in fresh blood through foreign brides. But these efforts were rare, fleeting, often undone by the next ruler's return to tradition. Better to marry a sister you trust than a foreign princess you fear. Better to keep the bloodline pure, even as it turns against you. You pause before another sealed doorway. Behind it, perhaps another body wrapped in gold, another child proclaimed divine, even as their bones broke beneath the weight of their ancestry. How many more lie hidden in the dark, waiting to tell the same story? You know now that these tombs aren't just monuments to power. They're monuments to fear, to the terror of losing what was never truly theirs to keep. Divine blood, sacred lineage. None of it could save them from the truths written in muscle and marrow. You press on. The air grows heavier still, the silence thicker. Ahead, more chambers wait, more bones, more whispers from the past calling you to listen, to understand, to remember. You pass beneath another low archway, your fingertips brushing faded symbols of eternity and protection. They failed, of course. Symbols cannot cure what is broken in the blood. They can only watch as each new generation repeats the same quiet tragedy. And now, You find yourself in a chamber unlike the others. The murals here don't hide the truth behind grandeur. Instead, they show something strange: elongated skulls, wide hips, soft, rounded bellies on bodies labeled as gods and kings. This isn't an artist's mistake. This is history's one moment of honesty, pressed into plaster by a boy who could no longer pretend. His name is Akhenaten. You know it already, though not for this. He's remembered as the heretic king, the one who abandoned Egypt's gods and built a city in the desert for a son no one wanted. But standing here, you start to understand why. His rebellion wasn't just religious. It was personal, painful, born of a body shaped wrong by generations of brother-sister unions. Imagine being born into a palace of perfection, only to realize your reflection doesn't match the statues of your ancestors. Your skull stretches long beneath your hair. Your hips widen like a woman's. Your chest swells into curves your royal robes cannot hide. You are told you are a god, but you see yourself in polished bronze and wonder, what kind of god looks like this? Historians still argue whether Akhenaten's deformities were exaggerated by later enemies or faithfully recorded by artists, finally freed from convention. But you're standing beneath murals that make it clear. This king didn't hide his truth. He forced others to look at it. Picture a young boy wandering palace halls where servants avert their eyes, where priests whisper behind their hands. Picture him growing into a prince whose every step is measured, whose every breath seems a struggle. His siblings look the same: elongated heads, curved spines, bodies marked not by divinity, but by inbreeding. In another life, in another dynasty, he might have been hidden away. But here, now, he becomes Pharaoh, and with his crown comes the power to reshape not just Egypt's religion, but its art, its very image of beauty. If his body is a temple, then the gods must look like him. If his suffering is holy, then let the world see holiness as crooked, as soft, as strange. You run your hand lightly over a mural of his family. Nefertiti stands beside him, beautiful, yes, but also painted with the same long skull, the same odd proportions. Their daughters mirror them exactly. This isn't divine imagery. This is documentation disguised as devotion. Out in the desert, Akhenaten builds a city from nothing, a place where no old god's shadows reach, where no one questions the shapes carved into temple walls. Here, he says, we worship the sun directly. No more middlemen, no more priests clinging to power through bloodlines, just light and life. But isolation breeds more than revolution. In this new city, the royal family remains alone in their strange beauty. Their fragile bodies press deeper into the genetic mold their ancestors left behind. Sons are born and die in infancy. Daughters survive, but not without whispers, sensitive to light, prone to fainting, unable to bear children without risk. Servants avert their eyes, doctors keep silent records, and still the king insists this is holy. The sun shines on them, and only them. The world beyond their city shrinks away, leaving them to worship their deformities in peace. And in this peace, the art changes. No longer stiff, idealized forms, but flowing lines, soft bellies, tender hands reaching for daughters who look more alien than human. The truth laid bare in pigment and plaster. The truth no dynasty before dared admit. This is what divine blood does, given enough time and enough denial. You wonder what Akhenaten thought as his body failed him further, as his children mirrored his pain. Did he still believe himself chosen? Or had he realized too late that the gods he abandoned were never the cause, that his family's ruin was sown into their veins long before he dared change the temples. Historians still debate whether his religious reforms were born of genuine faith or desperate defiance. Was Aten, the sun disk, a true god to him, or just a last hope that some new belief could cure what old traditions had poisoned? You move past another mural, this one more haunting. Akhenaten, bent slightly, his arms around a daughter whose head echoes his own in shape. A family portrait not of power, but of inheritance, of inevitability. Outside this city of sun, the priests plot. They wait for his death, for tradition's return, for statues to be smashed and names to be erased. But here, within these walls, he reigns still in paint and stone, a living monument to what happens when pride outweighs prudence, when faith replaces science, when family becomes a prison of blood, and when he dies, as all men do, God or not, the city crumbles behind him. The priests reclaim their power. The old gods return in gold and ritual. His memory is scraped from monuments, his reforms buried beneath sand and time. But the bones remain. The damage persists. The next generation still carries the marks of choices made centuries before. You step deeper into the shadows, leaving Akhenaten's city behind. Ahead waits the boy who will suffer most for this legacy, a boy whose name will be remembered not for his greatness, but for his tragedy, and waiting with him, another golden mask, another story written in bone beneath beauty. You move forward into another chamber, feeling the shift in the air. Dust settles differently here, as if even time itself hesitates to linger. The walls show fewer gods now, fewer triumphs in battle. Instead, you see scenes of a palace surrounded by emptiness, an echo of the desert city Akhenaten, built and abandoned. This is the heart of isolation. Not just physical isolation in a sun-blasted capital, but genetic isolation too. Here, the royal family lived together, worshiped together, married within itself over and over, until even the painters stopped trying to pretend their bodies were ordinary. You picture life inside these palace walls. Days spent beneath painted ceilings, servants moving quietly through rooms where no one dares speak the obvious aloud. A child plays with a toy boat, but tires quickly. His legs ache, his breath catches, his skull too heavy for his neck. A daughter sits in the sun, her skin pale, her bones fragile beneath layers of linen. They are watched, adored, feared, pitied, but never questioned. Outside, Egypt's people toil in fields and markets, their children running free beneath the same sun these royal infants cannot bear. But here, inside these golden cages, the blood thickens with each generation's mistake, and no one stops the spiral. Not the priests, who have returned to their old gods and old comforts. Not the advisors, who count inheritance above health. Not the family itself, too steeped in tradition to imagine escape. You pass a mural where Akhenaten's daughters dance for their father beneath the rays of the Aten sun, hands raised in worship. They look almost joyful until you notice the tilt of a neck, the bend of a spine. Art captures what words would not dare say aloud. This bloodline is breaking. And so, when Akhenaten dies, young, weak, a body undone by the choices of ancestors, he leaves behind not a legacy of faith, but a lineage teetering on the brink. His daughters remain. His wife fades into history, her fate debated endlessly by scholars. His sons, if they lived, died too young to matter. And in his place rises another boy, already marked by the same inherited curse. You think of the physicians preparing him for kingship. They wrap his fragile limbs in linen, brace his legs with carved canes, teach him how to walk just far enough to appear strong in public. They know better than to speak the truth aloud. His body tells it well enough. Historians still debate whether Tutankhamun's reign was ever truly his. Did he rule, or did others move his hand? Did he understand the weight of his ancestors' choices, or was he too busy surviving day by painful day to care? You step closer to a painted scene of the boy king enthroned. His face is calm, his posture stiff. Behind him, priests and courtiers bow low. Before him, offerings pile high, symbols of strength, fertility, eternity. A bitter joke, given what you know now. Behind this serene facade stood a boy who couldn't cross a room without assistance, who couldn't stand for long without leaning on something or someone. In this desert city, isolation grew thicker than the heat. No fresh blood entered these halls. No foreign brides softened the lineage. Only siblings and half-siblings, cousins and nieces, tangled together until names lost their meaning beyond the bonds of blood and repetition. You picture the boy's daily routine. Doctors adjusting his braces, servants carrying him when the ceremonies stretched too long, whispered prayers for strength he never found, ritual baths for purification, while his joints ached with swelling and weakness. Behind the gold and incense, a child struggling just to draw breath, and yet the tomb prepared for him gleams with treasures meant to declare victory over death. Chariots he could never ride, weapons he could never lift, thrones too heavy for a body that could not sit unaided. Over 130 walking sticks, some plain, some gilded, none symbolic, all necessary. These were not tools of power. They were tools of survival, of masking weakness beneath ceremony, of pretending the divine blood still held strength enough to rule. You wonder if he understood. If, in quiet moments beneath the desert stars, he cursed the lineage that made him both king and prisoner, or if he believed, as he was taught, that his suffering was holy, his deformities proof of closeness to the gods. Did he dream of children who might be spared his fate? Or did he know, as surely as the sun rose, that his half-sister wife carried the same flawed blood in her veins? Historians still argue whether love played any role in these unions, whether duty crushed affection beneath the weight of expectation. But the tomb holds answers more honest than words. Tiny mummies, wrapped and silent, buried with him, children born dead or too fragile to live. The final echo of a curse, too long ignored. You pause beside a faded doorway. Beyond it, the story continues, but for this moment, you linger. Because here, in this room, the isolation feels complete. A family trapped not by enemies or fate, but by its own refusal to change. Akhenaten's city crumbled. His gods fell silent. His reforms vanished beneath the sands. But his bloodline lingered just long enough to carve one final tragic chapter beneath a golden mask. And ahead, waiting, the boy king himself. His story written not just in legend, but in every fragile bone beneath his wrappings. You move deeper into silence now, stepping carefully through doorways made for processions long stilled. The air is heavy with old incense, faded to a ghost of itself. Ahead waits the boy king's final resting place, a space small, almost cramped for someone considered divine. But kingship doesn't bend to comfort, and neither does death. Imagine being born knowing you're a god, but living each day in a body that betrays you. Tutankhamun didn't walk like a god. He stumbled. He leaned on canes. He wore sandals specially made to fit feet twisted by clubfoot, a spine warped by scoliosis, a chest too narrow to draw deep breath. You picture him at 9, crowned pharaoh, draped in linen too fine to hide the trembling of his knees. Servants stand ready, eyes averted not out of reverence but out of pity. Priests chant of divine strength while carefully positioning him so he doesn't fall during the ceremony. Behind every golden statue, behind every offering, there's a quiet, desperate effort to keep the illusion alive. Egypt's gods still walk among men, but you know now that's a lie. Historians still argue whether he ruled at all or merely signed what priests and viziers placed before him, whether his brief reign mattered politically or was simply a necessary pause between more powerful men's ambitions. But his body tells a truth no inscription dares admit. Step closer to the golden artifacts surrounding his sarcophagus. They weren't chosen for symbolism alone. The chariots he could never ride, the bows he could never draw, the armor he could never wear, tools of war placed beside a boy who spent more time with physicians than generals, over 130 walking sticks buried with care. Some plain wood worn smooth by daily use, others gilded, encrusted with lapis and ivory. None meant for show, all meant to prop up a body collapsing under the weight of its own ancestry. You imagine the palace halls, lined with columns, where he moved slowly from one ritual to the next. Every step planned, every appearance rehearsed. Behind curtains, servants ready to catch him if his legs failed again. Behind doors, physicians preparing another poultice, another prayer, another futile attempt to mend what centuries had broken. Tutankhamun married his half-sister, Ankhesenamun. Not for love, though perhaps they found some comfort in shared pain. They were born of the same twisted tree, branches grown too close, leaves curling inward. Their union wasn't choice, it was expectation. A continuation of the belief that divine blood must not dilute, no matter the cost. The cost was high. Their children, if you can call them that, didn't live long enough to be named in any grand ceremony. 2 tiny mummies found in his tomb, swaddled and silent. Infants shaped by the same hands of fate, buried with the father who never had a chance to break the cycle. Imagine that grief, wrapped in silence. Imagine knowing that the gods demand purity, but purity poisons. That the traditions meant to ensure eternity instead ensure extinction. Yet you obey. You smile through ceremonies. You sit on the golden throne designed to make you look taller, stronger, more like the paintings on the temple walls. Behind you, priests mutter prayers. In front of you, courtiers bow. None dare mention the obvious. The pharaoh cannot stand unaided. Tutankhamun's physicians kept careful records. Bone disease, immune deficiencies, hormonal imbalances. They treated symptoms without knowing cause, without daring to speak what must have haunted them in sleepless hours. This boy was dying not of illness, but of inheritance. Historians still debate whether malaria killed him or a broken leg turned septic. But standing here, you understand the truth is older and deeper. His blood was already failing him. His bones were already crumbling. Disease didn't kill him. Genetics did, across generations, across choices made in temples and palaces by men too frightened of change to save their own children. You glance at the wall paintings again, They show strength, prosperity, divine approval. They lie. The real story is written in femurs too fragile, in vertebrae curved like question marks, in teeth crowded by jaws too narrow to hold them, in the walking sticks buried alongside him, silent testimony to years spent leaning on anything but faith. And still, when he died, young, alone, childless, they wrapped him in gold and called him eternal. They painted his tomb with scenes of victory over death. They spoke of paradise awaiting, of ancestors welcoming him home, as if gods would greet a boy broken by the very traditions meant to glorify them. You step closer to his sarcophagus, gaze lingering on the mask everyone knows. Serene, idealized, untouched by the truth beneath it. That mask hid more than a face. It hid centuries of denial. Outside, Egypt would stumble on without him. His name would vanish from records, his city from maps. It took modern eyes, modern science to exhume him and read the truth in his bones. A truth wrapped in gold but soaked in sorrow. The boy king's story doesn't end with his death. It lingers in genetics, in history, in the cautionary tale his lineage became. Ahead of you, more tombs wait, more rulers, more victims of purity mistaken for strength, but none will be remembered quite like him. Not for what he did, but for what his body could not survive. You move beyond the boy king now, past the golden mask, past the carefully arranged treasures meant to distract from the truth, into deeper chambers, deeper history, where the pattern sharpens and becomes impossible to ignore. This isn't just one sickly boy with a broken body and too many canes. This is a system, a cycle, a kingdom-wide denial project that stretched across generations, embalming weakness in ceremony, painting over deformity with scenes of divine perfection. You picture the artists at work in sunlit studios, crafting images of kings and queens as tall, straight-backed, perfect. Broad shoulders, strong jaws, wide strides. Never mind that the subjects themselves shuffled painfully down corridors, leaned on servants, coughed behind curtains. Art told the people what they needed to believe. The pharaoh was strong because Egypt was strong. The gods had blessed the bloodline. Questioning it meant questioning the divine itself. Imagine walking through a palace where every surface tells this lie. Statues tower over you in flawless proportions. Wall paintings depict victories won by bodies your own cannot match. Scrolls praise ancestors who never stumbled, never faltered, never fell to the flaws of flesh. And yet you, their heir, wake each morning needing assistance to stand. You are Tutankhamun, yes, but you are also every ruler before and after him caught in the same golden trap, forced to perform strength while privately unraveling, forced to marry within the same twisted bloodline because tradition said so, forced to sacrifice children on the altar of purity and call it divine will. Historians still argue how much these rulers understood about the trap they lived in. Did they know they were passing on sickness like a curse? Or did they believe what priests told them? That suffering was holy? That deformity was divine proof? Or perhaps, trapped by duty and fear, they simply convinced themselves it didn't matter. You pass more murals, more carvings. Crops flourish, armies march, kings stride boldly across the desert. None of it true, none of it reflective of the frail figures hidden behind palace doors, wrapped in linen and silence. Pretending to be divine became an industry. Whole hierarchies depended on the illusion. Priests who offered prayers, scribes who recorded victories, artists who painted youth where age failed, strength where weakness ruled. To speak the truth aloud, that the gods chosen were breaking beneath their own blood, was to risk everything. Easier to paint, to chant, to bow, and to bury the evidence beneath stone and ceremony. You imagine the strain of these performances. A prince carried to ceremonies by servants instructed to keep their faces blank. A princess painted as a goddess, while midwives whispered of her fourth stillbirth. A king propped upright on a throne for a festival, while doctors hid nearby with salves and bandages. Behind the scenes, the palace knew. The physicians knew. The servants knew. But knowing changes nothing when tradition rules. The blood must remain pure, they said. The lineage must not be diluted. Even if it breaks us, especially if it breaks us. You think of the advisors calculating risks. Better a sickly heir than a foreign alliance. Better a cousin than an outsider. Better to bury another child than to admit weakness to the people. Generation after generation, repeating the same mistake with grim efficiency, dressing up the results in gold and prayer. Tutankhamun's death was not the end of this pattern. Other rulers followed, some healthier, briefly, thanks to fleeting moments of genetic luck or foreign wives. But the cycle always resumed. Purity demanded it. Tradition enforced it. Fear sustained it. Outside the palace, the people endured, built monuments, fought wars, worshipped gods they would never see. Inside, the royal family shrank into itself, fewer and fewer branches on the family tree, names repeating like a chant. Brother, sister, cousin, niece. You pause beside a carving of Osiris judging souls. A feather weighed against a heart. Justice, truth, balance. You wonder how these rulers thought they would fare under such scales. Did they truly believe their sacrifices were noble? Their suffering earned them favor? Or did they fear what waited beyond death more than what haunted them in life? Historians still debate whether the priests believed their own myths or simply played their part. Whether anyone ever tried to break the cycle, or if each generation was too steeped in its own denial to see a way out. The evidence suggests fleeting moments of clarity, alliances with foreign princesses, marriages outside the immediate family. But they were rare, brief, quickly undone by successors clinging to the old ways. You step through another doorway into deeper silence. Here, the walls show not battles or gods, but gardens and feasts, symbols of life hoped for in the next world, life untouched by pain, by weakness, by deformity, a fantasy to soothe the living more than the dead, because in this world, they knew, they saw, they suffered, and still, they chose to continue. You press on. The pattern continues. The bloodline twists tighter. Ahead, more names wait. More bones. More whispers wrapped in linen and gold, telling the same story beneath different masks. You press forward, deeper still, and the path begins to blur between tomb and truth. These chambers grow quieter, heavier, not because of the weight of stone alone, but because of what they hold. Behind each wall lies another sealed confession, another attempt to bury what couldn't be spoken in life. Not all these tombs belong to kings. Some belong to infants, barely named before death. Some to young women who bore too many children too quickly, their bodies worn thin by duty and expectation. Some to princes who never wore crowns but carried the same poisoned legacy in their bones. Here, beneath the layers of gold and paint, Egypt's silent victims gather, not warriors, not conquerors, but children born into a lineage too proud to change, too trapped to escape. They were wrapped in linen, given amulets for protection, laid beneath prayers for safe passage to an afterlife where their bodies might finally work as they were meant to. Imagine walking these halls knowing how many tiny coffins lie behind these walls. Imagine understanding that these weren't rare tragedies, but expected outcomes. Every royal marriage was a gamble, every birth a risk. And yet, the cycle spun on, because admitting the truth meant dismantling the very foundation of Egypt's divine rule. You linger by a painted panel showing offerings laid before a child-sized sarcophagus, toys, food, tiny sandals never worn. A mother's grief hidden behind ritual, her tears washed away by priests eager to declare the child blessed, taken early for a higher purpose. Not defective, not doomed, chosen. Historians still argue whether these deaths were ever truly acknowledged as preventable, whether the royal court saw the pattern and refused to break it, or genuinely believed each tragedy was isolated, a sorrowful mystery rather than an inevitable result. But you've seen the records, you've traced the bones, you know the truth written in fragile skeletons and malformed skulls. This wasn't mystery, this was math. Biology repeating its lesson until even kings could not ignore it. Tutankhamun's tomb held 2 such coffins. Tiny mummies, silent witnesses to a marriage between half-siblings, a union meant to preserve purity, but destined only to perpetuate pain. Their bodies bore the same marks as their fathers: skeletal deformities, genetic damage visible even beneath layers of linen. They never breathed long enough to be named as heirs. You imagine the queen, Ankhesenamun, standing in the quiet after their deaths, alone in her palace, surrounded by servants who offered comfort without words, by priests who muttered of divine plans while she bled out yet another future. Did she know? Did she hate the tradition that demanded she wed her brother? Or was she simply too bound by duty to question it, even as it broke her heart again and again? Beyond these tombs, the priests continued their chants, the artists painted their lies, and the advisors plotted their alliances. The machinery of Egypt's power didn't pause for grief. A pharaoh? Dead? Crown the next. A child lost? Try again. Always forward. Always into the same darkness. You picture the tomb builders sealing these chambers, pressing plaster into cracks, painting over sadness with symbols of eternity. Another life safely hidden away. Another proof of failure disguised as sacred preservation. The tombs filled, the lineage thinned. Still, they told themselves it was worth it. Out in the fields, peasants buried their dead, with less ceremony, but more honesty. They mourned and moved on. Their children grew strong, played beneath the sun, mixed bloodlines freely without thought of purity or tradition. They built Egypt's monuments, fought its wars, filled its granaries. They survived. Inside the palace, survival became a luxury fewer and fewer children achieved. The blood grew weaker, the bodies more fragile, the risks too great to speak aloud. And still the priest declared the lineage divine, the traditions holy, the suffering necessary. Historians still debate whether there were moments of doubt, moments when a mother or father looked upon a sickly child and thought, enough. Moments when someone considered marrying outside the family, breaking the cycle for the sake of health, if not for love. Records hint at such possibilities. Alliances nearly made, foreign brides considered. But they were rare. and usually undone by successors determined to restore the old ways. You pause before another sealed doorway. Behind it, perhaps, another child lost too soon. Another life wrapped in gold and linen, hidden beneath prayers that could not change what blood had written. These tombs are not monuments to victory. They are monuments to denial, to fear, to the terrible weight of tradition carried too long by bodies too weak to bear it. You step back into the corridor, the walls pressing close once more. The path ahead leads deeper still, into dynasties that learned nothing from those who came before. More names etched in stone, more bones curled beneath gold, more lives spent pretending gods could save them from themselves. But even here, beneath layers of sand and silence, the truth waits. Written not in hieroglyphs, but in femurs and skulls, in miscarriages and stillbirths, in the aching emptiness of chambers meant for children who never learned to walk. You press on. The story continues. The pattern persists. The bloodline bends closer toward collapse. Ahead, more tombs, more names, more sorrow buried beneath painted promises of eternity. You step forward, and with each breath the air grows thinner, more ancient, as if you're descending not just through stone but through layers of human stubbornness. Ahead of you, the carvings change. Less grandeur now, fewer scenes of gods and afterlives. Instead, the focus shifts. Maps of conquests, names of foreign kings, marriages etched into stone to secure power. You know what's coming. A new dynasty. A new attempt to start over. But the past isn't so easily left behind. Imagine Egypt after Tutankhamun. His tomb sealed, his name erased from public records, his legacy brushed aside as though the problem died with him. Yet the priests still whisper about divine blood. The courtiers still arrange marriages with cousins and sisters. No one speaks of the two tiny mummies buried in silence. The cycle breathes on, even in shadows. Enter Alexander the Great, a conqueror who doesn't speak Egyptian, but understands power well enough to respect appearances. He doesn't erase Egypt's gods. He adopts them. He doesn't dismantle the old traditions. He exploits them. His generals follow his lead. And when he dies young, as all figures in this story seem doomed to, they carve up his empire like a prize. Egypt goes to Ptolemy, a man smart enough to see opportunity in superstition. Historians still argue whether Ptolemy believed himself divine or simply acted as though he did to appease the locals. But what matters is what he did next. He married his sister, and his children married theirs. Not because of love, not even because of tradition, but because Egypt had taught its rulers that pure blood means pure power. You pause beside a painted stele, showing these new rulers crowned by Egyptian gods. Macedonian faces beneath Egyptian headdresses. Foreign blood beneath local rituals. But the trap has already closed. To rule Egypt is to adopt Egypt's sickness, its obsession with lineage, its fear of dilution, its quiet devotion to self-destruction dressed up as destiny. Imagine the palace now, not sandstone, but marble. Not pharaohs, but kings and queens with Greek names and Egyptian titles. Cleopatra, the most famous among them, didn't spring from nothing. She was the end product of centuries of calculated incest. By the time she was born, her family tree was a circle so tightly wound it barely branched at all. Brother married sister. Cousin married cousin. Over and over. Because Egypt had taught them this was how gods ruled. You picture the palace halls, bright with torchlight, but dim beneath layers of secrecy. Children raised not just as siblings, but as future spouses. games played between those destined to share wedding beds. The psychological weight of it presses heavier than the stone overhead. To love your brother is expected. To marry him is duty. To bear his children is destiny. Behind closed doors, doctors murmur about deformities they cannot explain. Behind closed curtains, queens bleed out pregnancies that were doomed from conception. Behind closed lips, servants whisper about babies born too small, too twisted, too silent. But outside those walls, the processional marches on. Gods smile from painted ceilings. Priests declare blessings. The people bow. You wonder if Cleopatra ever considered breaking the cycle. Did she look at the records of stillbirths and early deaths and understand the truth? Or did she believe, as her ancestors had, that the gods demanded this sacrifice? Historians still debate her mind, her motives, her heart. What's clear is that she sought something new. Roman blood, Caesar's child, Antony's heirs, not for politics alone, but perhaps, deep down, as an escape hatch from generations of inbreeding, a new branch on a tree grown brittle from repetition. But fate, as always here, had other plans. Her children by Rome didn't survive long, not on thrones at least, not as rulers. And when she died, whether by asp or dagger or poison, she closed the chapter on Egypt's last great genetic experiment. A dynasty destroyed not by enemies alone, but by the belief that blood could be perfected through isolation. Outside this tomb, the Nile flows on. Rome rises. Egypt becomes a province, not a power. But inside these walls, the pattern lingers in bone and blood, in silent chambers filled with small coffins and hollow names. You pass another mural, this one worn almost smooth. A queen offers incense to a god who looks suspiciously like her brother. The gods demand purity. The people obey. The children suffer. The cycle repeats. Historians still search these tombs for answers, for proof, for understanding. But you know already what they'll find. Bones telling stories no inscription dared. Skulls shaped wrong. Joints twisted. Hearts stilled too soon. Names erased by time, but bodies that cannot lie. You press on. The pattern stretches ahead, long after kings and queens turn to dust. Ahead waits more silence, more lessons ignored, more generations who believed themselves divine until nature reminded them otherwise. You press on, deeper through the corridors where Egypt's strangest, saddest family trees stretch their shadows across the stone. The names here are no longer wholly Egyptian. They are Greek now. Ptolemy, Berenice, Arsinoe, Cleopatra. Yet the pattern stays unchanged beneath the foreign syllables. Brother marries sister, cousin marries cousin. Over and over. The language of the rulers changes, but the sickness beneath their skin remains stubbornly the same. You pause beside a painted frieze where siblings hold hands not as children, but as husband and wife. You try to imagine what it meant to grow up this way. Playing together under palace arches, learning letters and lineage at the same tutor's feet, knowing all the while that childhood games would someday harden into marriage contracts. No escape, no alternatives. You were born into your future long before you understood it. The Ptolemies didn't invent this madness. They inherited it. Egypt taught them. Egypt's priests nodded solemnly as Greek kings wrapped themselves in linen and gold, called themselves gods, and married their sisters to keep divine blood pure. Purity over health, lineage over survival. You think of Cleopatra, not the Hollywood version, not the painted seductress on coins, but the real woman shaped by generations of inbreeding. Born into a labyrinth of family ties so knotted that cousins were siblings, and siblings were spouses, and nephews were also sons. By the time she wore the crown, her bloodline resembled a spiral staircase turning ever inward. Historians still argue about Cleopatra's appearance. Was she truly beautiful? Probably not by modern standards. Generations of inbreeding rarely leave behind symmetrical faces or flawless features. More likely, she carried the same markers her ancestors bore. Sharp noses, heavy jaws, weak chins, bodies shaped by genetics rather than desire. What she had, indisputably, was brilliance. A mind sharpened by necessity, trained in languages, politics, survival. Picture her walking these halls, aware of her family's past, watching nieces and nephews falter under the same inherited burdens. She speaks 9 languages, but cannot speak freely about the price her bloodline has paid for tradition. Instead, she turns outward, looks to Rome, to fresh blood, to alliances that might break the cycle. Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, not just political partners, but genetic lifelines, new fathers for new heirs, a chance, perhaps, to breathe air not thick with history's mistakes. Her children by these men stood stronger, healthier, untouched by the spiral of sibling marriages. But politics proved deadlier than genetics. Rome had no patience for Egyptian dynasties. Octavian's sword swept clean what centuries of bloodlines had corrupted. Cleopatra's children died or vanished into obscurity. Her hopes for a new beginning ended as hers had begun, in entanglement, in loss, in silence beneath stone. You pause by a crumbling column where cartouches loop around one another, names repeating like echoes. Ptolemy, Cleopatra, Arsinoe, Ptolemy again. A genealogy folded in upon itself so many times it barely resembles a tree anymore, more like a snake swallowing its own tail. Inside these palaces, queens drank wine steeped in herbs to bring on miscarriage when another malformed heir was suspected. Inside these chambers, midwives prepared for births with linen and prayers and resignation. They knew the odds. They knew the signs. Infants born too early, too small, too twisted to survive. Tiny bodies wrapped and buried before names were even chosen. Outside, the people still worshipped the Nile, still brought offerings to gods who never answered. Life went on. Fields were planted, goods traded, festivals celebrated. But inside the palace walls, the dynasty rotted quietly behind curtains and ceremonies. You wonder how much Cleopatra understood. Did she wake at night wondering if her bloodline was cursed? Or did she accept it as the price of power? Historians still debate whether she acted out of love for Rome's generals or desperation to escape the genetic coffin her ancestors built. Perhaps both, perhaps neither. What remains is what matters. Her dynasty ended not in glory, but in extinction. Rome erased her monuments, chiseled away her face from temples, her name from records. Not entirely, of course. History forgets nothing completely. But Egypt's obsession with purity ended with her, and not by choice. You step deeper beneath cracked ceilings, where stars once painted in blue and gold now fade into dust. The silence grows louder. Not because there are no more voices, but because those voices repeat the same lament beneath every stone. We thought ourselves gods. We forgot we were only human. More tombs wait ahead, more bones. More proof that no lineage, however divine it claims to be, can escape the simple truth. Isolation breeds weakness. Purity breeds collapse. and history never stops watching. You walk on, and the silence shifts again. Not heavier. This part of the story carries its own kind of weight, but more suffocating, more intricate, like the weave of a tapestry pulled too tight. These halls, these tombs, these walls are crowded not with the noise of ancient rituals or the roar of armies, but with the quiet echoes of choices that trapped people from the moment they were born. Choices wrapped in silk and incense, enforced with prayers, inked into papyrus, and crowned in gold. Picture Cleopatra now, not the cartoon villain of Roman propaganda, not the seductress of Hollywood imagination, but the real woman shaped by generations of bloodlines twisted tighter than the golden filigree in her crown, born into a labyrinth of names folded back upon themselves. Ptolemy, Berenice, Arsinoe, Cleopatra, over and over. Uncles who were cousins, brothers who were husbands, nephews who were sons. A royal family tree not branching outward, but spiraling inward until it nearly strangled itself. Imagine being raised in a palace where everyone you played with as a child would someday share your table, your throne, your bed. No choice, no escape. From birth, you belonged not to yourself, but to a lineage obsessed with itself. You existed to preserve what had already poisoned you. Cleopatra was not blind to this. She was born into a dynasty where death came often in infancy, and where beauty was rarely unmarred by the marks of inherited weakness, weak chins, long noses, protruding teeth, fragile bones hidden beneath robes of silk. Historians still argue whether she inherited these features herself. Ancient coins show a woman with sharp features, an uncompromising gaze, a nose more hawk than dove. What matters is not whether she was beautiful. What matters is that she was brilliant. She spoke 9 languages in a world where most rulers struggled with 2. She read philosophy and wrote treatises. She ruled a crumbling kingdom with wit, cunning, and ruthless practicality. While her ancestors preserved bloodlines, she preserved power. She understood Egypt was no longer the center of the world. Rome was. And so she turned outward, beyond her poisoned family tree, seeking alliances not just in politics, but in flesh. Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, men whose bloodlines traced not in spirals, but in conquest. These were not just lovers or allies. They were the promise of children born free of the Ptolemies' genetic curse. Stronger sons, healthier daughters, a future unbound from Egypt's past. You pause in a corridor where a fading frieze shows a queen offering incense to the gods. The image feels hollow now. The gods had long since stopped listening, or perhaps they never listened at all. Behind that painted serenity lay generations of dead infants, of heirs too weak to rule, of queens who bled out in childbirth again and again. Behind those serene eyes lay exhaustion no ceremony could hide. Outside these tombs, Egypt's people planted fields, baked bread, lived lives untouched by royal burdens. They mixed blood freely. Their children grew strong, married across villages, built futures from diversity. Inside these marble halls, the royal family shrank into itself, each generation smaller, weaker, more haunted by the past. Historians still debate Cleopatra's motives. Was it ambition that tied her to Rome, or desperation? Was she playing the final hand of a dynasty too long in decline, or trying to save her children from inheriting not just a throne, but a curse? Caesarion, her son by Julius Caesar. Alexander Helios, Ptolemy Philadelphus, her sons by Mark Antony. Selene, her daughter. children born of new blood, not siblings, not cousins, children who might break the cycle. But Rome had no patience for Egyptian experiments in salvation. Caesarion was hunted and killed. Antony's sons vanished into exile, married off into obscurity. Selene was given away like a prize, sent to marry into a different kind of lineage, her fate tied not to Egypt's gods, but to Rome's politics. You pause beneath a cracked column where cartouches loop around one another, names entwined like ivy choking a crumbling wall. Ptolemy, Cleopatra, Arsinoe, again. A genealogy turned Ouroboros, devouring its own tail. You wonder if Cleopatra saw it as clearly as you do now. If, as she watched her children carried off, her empire dissolved, her city burned, she understood how this story would always end. Did she press the asp to her skin in defiance or in weary surrender? Historians argue over method, but the motive seems clearer. Better to die on her own terms than live paraded in chains through streets that would never understand her story. Better to end it than to watch her children swallowed by the same hunger for power that destroyed generations before her. You walk beneath ceilings where stars once shone gold on deep blue paint. They fade now into dust. The silence here is not peace. It is aftermath. The priests still burn incense somewhere far above, but their prayers no longer reach these depths. The people still offer food to statues, but the statues cannot answer. The bloodline is broken, not by gods, not by curses, by its own hand, by its own pride. Outside, Rome rules. The Nile flows on. Egypt survives, but is history now, not empire. These bones beneath your feet whisper the truth to anyone who listens. Purity breeds collapse. Isolation invites ruin. Blood remembers long after names are forgotten. You run your hand along the wall, tracing faint grooves where once proud words declared eternity. Those words crumbled with the bodies they praised. What remains now is only this: a lesson written in bones, carried forward so others might not repeat the same spiral. Ahead, the darkness deepens, the corridors tighten, the story draws toward its inevitable end. But you understand now what those ancient rulers could not. You see clearly what they refused to face. No blood is pure enough to escape nature. No lineage is divine enough to outwit decay. And no name, however golden, can silence the truth written in marrow and in silence. You walk onward, deeper into these labyrinthine tombs, where the air feels older with every step. Dust floats in slow spirals beneath your feet, as if reluctant to settle where so much sorrow already sleeps. This is not grandeur anymore. These chambers grow smaller, humbler. Not the final resting places of rulers who held scepters and crowns, but of those who bore the weight of those crowns in flesh and blood, and broke beneath it. You pause where a faded mural struggles to remain upon crumbling plaster. A queen offers incense to Osiris, her painted face serene, her posture flawless. Yet you know better now. Behind such serene imagery lies another reality. These queens, these mothers, these daughters were vessels for a bloodline that grew more fragile with each generation. Their beauty preserved only in paint, their bodies hidden beneath silk and silence. Picture one of them, not a Cleopatra, but a sister in name and duty. Imagine her wedding night, not as a celebration, but as a sentence. A brother beside her, a cousin beneath the crown. No choice, no escape. Only tradition binding her more tightly than any linen shroud. The women of this dynasty bore not just children, but the unspoken truth of a legacy unraveling beneath its own weight. Inside these tombs, you see their futures written not in gold, but in bone. Small sarcophagi lined in neat rows. Infants wrapped in linen, buried beneath prayers that begged for what their bodies could not grant. Strength, longevity, a future free from weakness. Yet no god answered. No priest's chant could outwit the blood already poisoned within. Historians still debate how aware these women were. Did they understand the risk with every pregnancy? Did they fear each birth, knowing the odds grew worse with each repetition? Or had centuries of tradition worn down even the sharpest fears into resignation? Perhaps they simply prayed harder, hoping faith might succeed where biology failed. You linger at the edge of a burial alcove barely large enough for a child. The linen has rotted, the bones fragile as breath, but the story remains. A child born to inherit a kingdom, dead before he learned to speak. Another name written and then erased. Another hope lost to the hunger of a lineage too proud to change. Outside these walls, life moved on. Farmers harvested grain. Fishermen cast nets into the Nile. Children played without knowing the weight of lineage, without fearing that love might be forbidden by bloodlines. The ordinary people lived and died in peace, their bodies strong with the diversity Egypt's rulers feared. They built pyramids, tended temples, carved histories that outlasted the kings who ordered them. Inside these walls, though, the spiral tightened. Cousins married cousins, brothers married sisters. Every generation grew thinner, weaker, more brittle beneath the gold and silk. Physicians recorded symptoms in careful, silent scripts. Malformed bones, stillbirths, wasting sickness, unexplainable fevers. They understood the pattern, but to speak it aloud would mean exile, or worse. So they wrapped their knowledge in linen, buried it beneath prayers, and waited for others to understand. Imagine the servants who prepared these bodies. They washed small limbs with gentle hands, knowing they would not live to bear scepters or crowns. They painted the eyes on sarcophagi, knowing those eyes would never open again. They carried these tiny coffins to rest beneath stone, knowing this was not the first and would not be the last. Grief became routine. Death became tradition. You trace a line of hieroglyphs barely legible now. They ask for health, for strength, for eternal life. None came. These children found no eternity in this world, and perhaps not in the next. What they left behind was not legacy, but lesson. Not glory, but caution written in marrow and sealed beneath sand. Historians still debate when the pattern might have been broken. There were moments, marriages to foreign princesses, alliances that brought fresh blood into royal veins. But those moments passed quickly, undone by successors clinging to old fears. Better, they thought, to trust blood than to trust strangers. Better to marry a sister than risk an outsider. Even as bones snapped and lungs failed and hearts could not beat beyond childhood. You pause beneath a painted ceiling where stars once gleamed gold on lapis blue. They fade now into dust, but their message lingers. These rulers believed they secured eternity through blood, through ritual, through the careful weaving of names into hierarchies too tight to breathe. But eternity answers only to truth, and the truth lay beneath linen and silence all along. Ahead, the corridors narrow further. The air grows thinner. The silence presses in tighter, not with threat, but with the slow, heavy inevitability of history repeating itself until there is nothing left to repeat. You know now that what waits ahead is not revelation, but confirmation. Another tomb, another name, another child lost to a lineage that chose tradition over life. You walk on, more slowly now, listening to the quiet. Beneath your feet, beneath the stone, beneath centuries of forgetting, bones still whisper the same message over and over. Isolation is death. Purity is poison. Blood remembers. And no crown, no priest, no painted god can change that truth. You walk deeper still, through passageways grown so narrow and low that you must slow your steps, duck your head. These are not grand corridors made for kings or queens to process in triumph. These are the forgotten arteries of a tomb complex that stretches far beyond what visitors were ever meant to see. Here is where the dead sleep quietly, away from gold, away from glory, away from the lies painted on temple walls. The air grows colder here, though you know it's not the temperature alone. It's the weight of time pressing in on you, layer by layer, decade by decade. The stories of these bones have been waiting centuries to be heard. They were wrapped in linen, not just to preserve flesh, but to contain truths too terrible to speak aloud in life. You pause at a sealed alcove, the stone chipped and scarred by time. Behind it lies another body, small, fragile, anonymous now. No golden mask here, no treasures buried for the afterlife. Only the brittle evidence of a lineage that turned inward upon itself too many times. Another child born too early, too weak, too broken to survive the weight of expectation placed upon their blood. Imagine the physician who tended this birth. Another silent nod, another hidden sigh, another notation added to the long, grim list of symptoms that repeated like a curse across generations. Clubfoot, cleft palate, scoliosis, hydrocephalus, stillbirth. Terms they did not know then, but patterns they recognized all too well. They watched children born twisted by bloodlines wrapped too tightly upon themselves and called it divine mystery, called it the will of the gods, called it purity. Historians still debate whether the royal families of Egypt understood what they were doing. Did they grasp, even dimly, that each sibling marriage tightened the noose a little more? Did they notice that their children grew weaker, their lifespans shorter, their bodies less capable of bearing the titles placed upon them? Perhaps some did, but power has a way of smothering doubt beneath layers of ceremony. And the cycle continued. Marriages arranged not for love, not even for politics, but for fear. Fear of dilution, fear of strangers, fear of losing the fragile thread that tied them to gods who had long since turned away. They thought themselves eternal because they refused to mix their blood with those beneath them. But eternity does not come through isolation. It comes through adaptation, through change, through letting go of what no longer serves survival. You run your hand along a cracked column where hieroglyphs speak of health, fertility, divine favor, lies, all of them. These blessings did not reach the bodies buried beneath these stones. They withered in infancy. They faded in childhood. They failed to thrive under the crushing weight of expectation. And each time, the priests painted another mask, wrote another scroll, offered another prayer to gods who had long since gone silent. Imagine the mothers who bore these children. Queens wrapped in linen and jewels, paraded before altars, while their bodies bore the cost of centuries of inbreeding. Miscarriages hidden behind veils, stillbirths wrapped in silence, living children who could not walk, could not eat, could not breathe without pain. And yet, With each generation, they obeyed. Married brothers, married cousins, produced heirs because duty demanded it, even as their bodies rebelled. You pass through another threshold, the ceiling pressing so low now, it feels like the tomb itself is closing in upon you. Another mural peels from the wall. A king offering grain to Osiris. A queen presenting flowers to Isis. Rituals repeated long after they ceased to hold meaning. Outside, the Nile rose and fell. Crops grew and failed. Empires shifted. But inside these walls, the same story played again and again until there were no players left. Historians trace these cycles: isolation, collapse, recovery through foreign blood, then isolation again. The Old Kingdom fell. The Middle Kingdom married foreign princesses, and health returned briefly. The New Kingdom grew arrogant again, and the spiral resumed. The Ptolemies perfected the art of self-destruction, marrying brother to sister until no fresh blood remained to save them. The evidence lies scattered across museums and excavation reports. Bones deformed, skulls elongated, spines twisted. The human body telling truths no priest dared record. You think of the servants who carried these tiny coffins to their rest, the midwives who prepared these fragile bodies for burial. They knew. They saw the truth in limbs that would never walk, in lungs that never filled, in hearts that stopped too soon. Yet they said nothing. Survival demanded silence. And now, the silence is all that remains. It hums beneath your feet. It presses against your ears. These tombs are full of echoes, not of voices, but of patterns repeating until nothing is left to repeat. Ahead, one final chamber waits. The spiral tightens to its end. The bones tell the same story, over and over. Isolation is death. Purity is poison. Blood remembers, even when names are forgotten. You step forward, slower now, not in fear, not in reverence, but in acknowledgement. The past cannot touch you here, but it can warn. It can teach. It can whisper from the dust beneath your feet what no scroll ever dared write. Humanity cannot outwit nature, not with gold, not with ritual, not with lineage. You walk forward again, through the narrowing arteries of stone, deeper into the earth, deeper into silence. The air grows heavier now, not because there's less of it, though that may be true, but because every step forward presses you further beneath centuries of mistakes no one wanted to admit. These walls hold no illusions anymore, no painted gods, no triumphant processions, no golden masks staring down at you with the hollow serenity of eternity. Here, the stones speak only of what was lost. You pause, running your fingers across hieroglyphs worn almost smooth. The same prayers, the same invocations, strength, health, fertility, protection. The words repeat like a broken ritual, echoing through generations that forgot their purpose. These spells could not protect the bodies buried beneath. They could not halt the slow decay written into bone. The gods did not answer. Or perhaps the gods had long since turned away, leaving only men to repeat their own mistakes until there were no voices left to carry on. Imagine the last generations of these dynasties. Not kings and queens as we imagine them, powerful, immortalized in marble and gold, but frail figures behind silk curtains, carried on litters because their legs could not support them. Children wrapped in linen, not for burial, but to brace weak spines. Girls prepared for marriages they knew would kill them slowly. Boys destined to rule over empires they could barely walk across. Historians still debate whether these rulers understood the cost of their bloodlines. Perhaps they did, in whispers, behind closed doors, beneath layers of incense and denial. Perhaps they noticed that each child born carried the weight of their ancestors' pride in twisted bones and shallow breaths. Or perhaps they were too steeped in tradition to care, too blinded by fear of change to see a path forward. Better to marry a cousin than trust an outsider. Better to risk deformity than disgrace. And so the cycle repeated, slow and cruel. New marriages celebrated beneath banners proclaiming divine favor. New births mourned behind veils before the wailing could even begin. Physicians wrote notes they dared not share beyond the palace walls. Clubfoot, cleft palate, hydrocephalus, stillbirth. Infant mortality dressed in royal linen. Midwives washed tiny bodies that would never grow into crowns, prepared small coffins while priests muttered of gods who worked in mysteries no one dared question aloud. You walk into a chamber where coffins once stood in rows, children laid side by side beneath painted ceilings. The ceilings crumble now. The stars painted in blue and gold have faded to dust, but beneath them still lie the truths those mothers wept over in silence. Children who never breathed freely, never ran beneath the sun, never survived the weight of names carved for them in stone long before they were born. Outside these walls, Egypt's people moved forward. Farmers tilled the land. Fishermen cast their nets. Merchants traded along the Nile's winding path. Their bloodlines tangled freely, strengthened by the diversity their rulers feared. They bore children who survived, who married across villages, who carried Egypt forward not through bloodlines, but through labor, through resilience, through life. Inside these tombs, the bloodlines rotted slowly beneath silk and gold, generation after generation folding inward, names repeating like curses, bodies breaking beneath the weight of inherited fragility. No physician could stop it. No priest could pray it away. No god intervened. You pause before another alcove where offerings once stood. Bread turned to dust. Wine evaporated into memory. Tokens meant to ensure passage into an afterlife where bodies might finally be whole. You wonder if those who placed them here believed in that promise, or if they simply clung to ceremony, because hope had long since abandoned them. Historians still unearth these tombs, these bones, these brittle reminders of humanity's refusal to heed its own warnings. DNA confirms what bones already showed. Isolation leads to weakness. Inbreeding compounds mistakes. Purity breeds collapse. The evidence is written not in hieroglyphs, but in marrow, in calcium, in twisted femurs and malformed skulls. You think of Cleopatra's children, not just Caesarean, hunted down and killed before manhood, but the others born of her desperate grasp for new blood. Alexander Helios, Ptolemy Philadelphus, Selene, who survived only to be wed into Rome's tangled politics. Were they stronger? Perhaps, but Rome had no use for Egypt's heirs. Their bloodlines vanished into obscurity, their futures erased before they could prove whether the curse had ended or simply moved elsewhere. Ahead of you, the corridors tighten. The light fades to something more felt than seen. These chambers were not meant for ceremony. They were meant to hide what could not be paraded in gold. The failures. The children too fragile for marble statues or painted frescoes. The reminders that blood does not purify itself through isolation. It curdles, it corrodes, It collapses inward until there is nothing left to sustain it. You run your hand along another cracked pillar where the names repeat: Ptolemy, Cleopatra, Arsinoe, again and again, until they blur together like a chant spoken by someone who no longer understands the words. These names were meant to signify eternity. Instead, they became tombstones layered atop one another, marking the slow suffocation of a lineage that mistook pride for preservation. Historians trace these cycles like archaeologists unwrapping mummies, layer after layer of repetition, of denial, of tradition carried past the point of reason. Isolation, collapse, brief recovery through new blood, arrogance reborn. The spiral turns again. Egypt taught the world this lesson first, but the world learned slowly, if at all. Europe's crowned heads repeated the pattern centuries later. Cousins married cousins. Bloodlines shrank. Madness and frailty followed. The warning signs ignored until history had no choice but to repeat itself. You step through another doorway, this one lower still, forcing you to bow as you enter. Humility seems appropriate here. These bones beneath your feet do not need your reverence, but they deserve your understanding. They carried the burden of decisions made long before their births. They paid the price for traditions no one dared break. Their silence now speaks louder than any inscription. Ahead, one final chamber waits. The end of the spiral. The last sealed confession beneath layers of sand and ceremony. You step forward, not in fear, but in respect. You have heard their story. You have seen what they tried to hide beneath linen and gold, and you understand now what they could not. Purity is not protection. Tradition is not truth. Blood remembers and bone bears witness long after names are forgotten. Beyond this final door, the silence deepens. The story draws to its close, but its lesson lingers, waiting for those willing to listen. You press deeper still, each step echoing softer now, as though even sound itself hesitates to disturb what waits ahead. These corridors are no longer pathways. They are thresholds between memory and silence. Here, history exhales its last breath, not with fanfare, but with the slow unraveling of centuries of denial, of choices repeated until they became rot in the marrow of a kingdom. The air tastes older here. You feel it on your skin, dry and weightless like ash. The stone walls close in narrower, as if the past itself is folding over you, guiding you toward the heart of the spiral. Not grand halls, not chambers of splendor, but tight, dark spaces where truth hid because no one wished to see it in daylight. You stop before another alcove. The coffin inside is small, barely larger than a cradle. Another child born into a name too heavy for their bones. Another body wrapped in prayers stitched into linen, placed beneath charms and amulets meant to guide them safely into a life beyond this one, because this one had offered them so little. Imagine the mother, not a queen with golden diadem and perfumed oils, but a woman hollowed by repetition. The first child dead before speech, the second too fragile to feed, the third gone before breath could fill lungs fully. And still, duty demanded she try again. Marry her brother, bear another heir, wrap her grief beneath layers of silk and smile at ceremonies while the bones of her children settled beneath stone. Historians still debate whether anyone dared speak these truths aloud. Were there moments in shadowed chambers when someone finally said it? When a physician lowered his gaze and admitted that lineage had rotted from within? When a priest, hands trembling over incense, wondered if the gods had turned away or had never listened at all. But no record tells us. The records tell only of processions, of offerings, of kings who reigned briefly and died young. The coffins tell more. They tell of spines bent in infancy, skulls stretched by inheritance, hearts stopped before manhood. They tell of a bloodline choking itself in the name of purity. You move onward. The murals here fade into abstraction, patterns repeated until they lose meaning. Lotus flowers, ankhs, falcons, suns, symbols once radiant, now flaking from the walls like scales from a snake that cannot shed itself whole. These halls are not places of worship anymore. They are places of warning, carved not by priests but by consequence. Imagine the royal physicians who documented this decline. Lineage charts tangled with repetition, symptoms scribbled in margins, curvature of the spine, fragile limbs, stillbirth, miscarriage, swelling without cause, bleeding without end, notes hidden beneath wax seals, behind locked doors, knowledge forbidden to touch daylight. Outside these walls, Egypt's sun still burned, the Nile still flowed, markets still bustled. But inside, the bloodline collapsed in silence, folding upon itself until even the gods must have grown weary. Osiris turned his back. Isis wept until her tears dried to dust. Ra watched from a distance, unmoved. And so came Rome, not with mercy, not with salvation, but with iron and ambition. Cleopatra reached for new blood, for new futures through Caesar and Antony. Her children bore no twisted limbs, but they bore the mark of empire instead. Their futures ended beneath Roman swords, their names erased from dynasties, their bodies scattered beyond Egypt's sands. You run your fingers along the stone. The inscriptions are faint now, cartouches worn smooth by centuries of neglect. Names loop and spiral: Ptolemy, Cleopatra, Arsinoe, until they vanish into themselves. The bloodline ends here, not with a crown, not with a ceremony, but with silence, thick as the sand above your head. Historians trace these patterns like hieroglyphs, layer by layer. They see the cycle: isolation, decay, collapse, brief recovery through foreign blood, then arrogance reborn, the spiral tightening again. Egypt wrote this lesson first, but others would follow. Habsburg jaws, Romanov weakness, Bourbon madness, all echoes of this same song. You think of the servants who walked these halls, carrying small coffins, whispering prayers with tired lips. They knew the pattern. They saw the bodies. They wrapped the bones. Yet survival demanded silence. And so silence ruled. Until now. Until you walked these halls and heard what they could not speak. Ahead, the corridor narrows again. You stoop lower to pass beneath lintels cracked by time, by weight, by history leaning in too close. The chambers grow smaller, tighter. The air stills entirely. Even dust seems reluctant to settle here. One final alcove, one final name, one final coffin wrapped in linen long dissolved to nothing but threads and faith. No gold, no splendor, only bones telling a story written in whispers and blood. You understand now what they could not. Purity breeds collapse, isolation poisons. Bloodlines are not strengthened by tightening the circle, but by opening the door. The world outside moved on. Egypt became memory. Rome became ruins. But the bones beneath your feet remain, waiting for someone to listen. You bow your head not in reverence, but in acknowledgement. The past cannot touch you here, but it can teach you. It can remind you. It can warn you of what happens when tradition hardens into chains and no one dares break them. Beyond this final chamber, waits only silence. The story draws to its end, but its echoes will follow you, not as fear, as understanding. You press through the final doorway, feeling the weight of every step settle deeper into your bones. This isn't just another room. This isn't just another tomb. This is the end of the spiral, the final breath of a lineage that believed itself untouchable, immortal, divine, until the marrow beneath their gilded ribs told them otherwise. Here, there are no grand murals, no painted gods to offer illusions of eternity, no golden thrones for the dead to sit upon. Only stone, worn smooth by the slow patience of time. Only silence, heavy as the sand pressing down from above. Only a coffin, simple, plain, tucked into the earth as if ashamed of what it contains. You pause, your hand resting against the cold rock. This was meant to be the culmination of generations of power, the final seal on a dynasty that traced itself to gods and believed blood could preserve divinity, like honey preserves flesh. But the gods were silent. The blood rotted itself hollow. Imagine the burial. Fewer mourners now, fewer prayers. The priests tired, the servants weary of carrying bodies too small, too frail, wrapped too often. A child, perhaps. Another child. Or a prince who never grew strong enough to rule, hidden away until death offered quiet relief. Or a daughter, buried nameless because names no longer mattered in a lineage already marked for oblivion. Historians still debate the end, whether this was truly the last or simply the last to be remembered. But bones don't lie. The pattern stops here, in this room where silence holds more truth than any inscription. You move closer, studying the worn hieroglyphs on the coffin lid. They are faded, hesitant, as if even the scribe who carved them understood they were writing not promises of eternal life, but epitaphs for a mistake played out too long. Prayers for health, for protection, for rebirth. Words that crumbled even as they were spoken. Outside these walls, the world moved on. Rome tightened its grip. The Nile flowed without noticing. Egypt became memory, then province, then story, told by those who never walked these halls. The names faded. The gods changed. The people forgot. But beneath the sand, the bones remained, waiting, watching, reminding. You pause before the sarcophagus, tracing the faint shape of an ankh. Life eternal, they believed. Life repeated, reborn, sustained through purity. But purity does not sustain. Purity starves. Purity isolates. Purity turns blood to poison and names to echoes lost beneath stone. Think of the physicians who stood here last, cataloging deformities, wrapping bones too fragile to withstand even breath, recording symptoms they could not name, but recognized all the same. The same curvature of spine, the same hollow chests, the same misshapen skulls, the same tired rituals to gods who gave no answer. You stand in the silence they left behind, the silence they could not escape, the silence written in bones beneath linen, in marrow too weak to carry the weight of crowns, the silence that followed when no air remained to wear them. Historians trace these lines backward through Egypt's long corridors of time. They see the cycles: isolation, decay, collapse, brief recoveries through marriages to Nubian queens, to Libyan daughters, to foreign brides who brought new breath into tired blood. But those lessons never lasted. Arrogance always returned. Fear always whispered. The spiral always tightened again until the end became inevitable. Egypt wrote this lesson first, but others followed. Europe's crowned heads learned too late. the Habsburg jaw, the Romanov frailty, the Bourbon madness. Cousins married cousins, believing blood would strengthen, would preserve, would protect. Instead, it eroded century by century until all that remained were relics and regrets. You think of the servants who carried this coffin, who lit the lamps, who closed the door behind them for the last time. Did they understand what they buried? Not just a body, not just a child, but a lineage, a dynasty, a belief system crumbling beneath the weight of its own hubris. Did they whisper to each other in the dark? Did they fear that their gods had abandoned them? Or did they finally understand those gods had never been there at all? You press your palm to the lid of the coffin. The stone hums beneath your skin, not with sound, but with history, with sorrow, with exhaustion, with the truth of bones beneath silk, of hearts beneath crowns, of blood beneath prayers. This is not a monument to power. This is a confession in stone. We thought ourselves above nature. We thought ourselves immortal. We thought ourselves gods. The bones beneath your hand say otherwise. Outside, the sun sets again on Egypt. The Nile moves on. The world forgets. But beneath this chamber, beneath this weight of sand and time, the bones remain, not waiting for resurrection, waiting to be understood, waiting for someone to see clearly what they could not. Purity breeds collapse. Isolation kills. Tradition rots when left unchallenged. Blood remembers, and bones never lie. You step back. The silence here is final. The story ends beneath your feet, beneath this coffin, beneath this stone. Not with glory, not with eternity, but with understanding. You turn, stepping back into the darkness of the corridor. The air feels lighter now, not because the burden has lifted, but because you've carried it far enough to see where it ends. You walk away, not with fear, but with knowledge, not with reverence, but with clarity. The past cannot touch you, but it can teach you. Ahead, the darkness softens. The path leads upward, away from bones, away from silence, toward light and air and the endless movement of time. You carry the lesson now. You carry the warning. Let it rest in your bones, quiet and patient. Let it remind you, blood does not preserve us. Love does. Connection does. Change does. And somewhere above, the Nile still flows. And now, as you sit with this story resting heavy in your chest, let yourself breathe slower, deeper. The past cannot reach you here. These bones cannot reach through stone. Their silence cannot harm you. They have already said what they needed to say. Close your eyes, just for a moment. Picture the Nile, calm beneath the soft gold of a fading sun, winding through fields of green and silt. Not the Nile of kings and curses, the Nile of fishermen, of mothers and children, of ordinary people who lived and died beneath skies, untouched by the weight of crowns. That world outlasted the palaces. It always will. Let the quiet stretch around you like linen soft against skin. Let the weight of tombs and names and bloodlines fade from your shoulders. You are not trapped in stone corridors. You are here, in this moment, breathing air those long-dead kings never could. You are free in ways they never were. Think of the lessons buried with them, not as threats, but as reminders to cherish what endures. Health over heritage, love over lineage, connection over pride. These are the gifts that last, when bones are dust and crowns forgotten. Imagine those ancient children, those weary queens, those silent priests, finally at peace beneath sands that no longer demand obedience. Imagine their voices quiet now, their suffering ended. What remains is only knowledge, carried forward so others might not repeat what they could not escape. You've walked long enough through darkness tonight. Let yourself step back into light. Let the echoes soften until they are nothing more than gentle reminders fading beneath the sound of your own steady breath. You are not bound by their choices. You are free to choose differently, to live with eyes open, with heart open, with a future unchained from the past. Rest now. The story is finished. The tombs are sealed. The dust has settled. Nothing waits for you in those corridors anymore but silence, and you've heard enough of that for one night. Sleep well. Dream better. Tomorrow is waiting, and it carries no weight of kings.